Not every forest sleeps. Some whisper, some choose. Sarah thought she found the forest, but the truth is the forest found her. Now, it wants her soul. "What?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves that seemed to whisper secrets in a language older than words. Thomas's weathered face was pale in the dappled moonlight filtering through the ancient canopy. His hands trembled as he gripped his walking staff, knuckles white with tension. "A guardian," he breathed. "The forest has made you its guardian." Sarah looked down at her hands. They glowed with a faint ethereal luminescence. Not quite green, not quite gold, but something in between. The light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she could feel something vast and ancient thrumming through her veins, like a second pulse. "I don't understand," she said, flexing her fingers. The light intensified, casting dancing shadows across Thomas's face. "What does that mean?" "It means," Thomas said slowly, choosing his words with care, "that you are bound to this place now. Not as a prisoner, but as a protector. The forest chose you because it sensed something in you. A connection, a kinship with the wild things. It's been waiting for someone like you for over a century." Sarah's mind reeled. Just hours ago she had been a simple botanist, here to study the rare ecosystem of Thornwood Forest. She had ignored all the warnings from the villagers, dismissed their superstitious tales as folklore meant to scare off tourists. But when she had ventured too deep, when she had stumbled upon the ancient grove at the forest's heart, everything had changed. The trees had spoken to her, not in words, but in feelings, images, memories spanning thousands of years. And when Thomas had found her, performing what he called the old ritual to save her from becoming just another missing person statistic, something unexpected had happened. The forest had accepted her, but not as a sacrifice. "Thomas," Sarah said, her voice steadier now, "you need to tell me everything. What happened here a century ago? Why has the forest been waiting?" The old man sighed deeply and gestured to a fallen log, its surface covered in luminescent moss that glowed brighter as Sarah approached. "Sit," he said. "This will take some time." The last guardian Thomas settled himself on a twisted root, his joints creaking like the ancient trees around them. He pulled out a small flask from his coat and took a long drink before offering it to Sarah. She declined with a shake of her head. "The last guardian," Thomas began, "was my great-grandmother, Elena Thornwood. Yes, the forest and our family share a name. That's no coincidence. The Thornwoods have served this forest for generations, acting as intermediaries between the human world and the wild. But we were never guardians ourselves. That role requires something more, something we didn't possess." He paused, his eyes distant with memory, or perhaps with stories passed down through generations. Elena was different. She wasn't born a Thornwood. She came here from the east fleeing something. She never said what. My great-grandfather found her collapsed at the forest's edge near death. He brought her to the grove, hoping the forest's magic might save her. And it did, but not in the way anyone expected. Sarah leaned forward, the glow from her hands illuminating Thomas's weathered features. "She became a guardian?" "Yes. For 50 years she protected this forest from those who would harm it. Loggers, developers, poachers. She turned them all away, sometimes gently, sometimes not. The forest thrived under her care. But then," Thomas's voice cracked, "then she made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "She fell in love." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt the forest around them shudder, as if the very trees remembered that ancient heartbreak. "My great-grandfather," Thomas continued, "loved her desperately. And she loved him. But a guardian cannot have divided loyalties. The forest demands everything. Total commitment, absolute devotion. When Elena chose love over duty, when she left the forest to marry him," he closed his eyes. "The forest felt betrayed. What happened? It withdrew its protection from the entire region. Crops failed. Animals disappeared. People got lost in woods they'd known their entire lives. 3 children vanished without a trace. Thomas opened his eyes and they were wet with tears. Elena tried to return, tried to reclaim her role, but the forest wouldn't accept her anymore. She had broken the bond. She spent the rest of her life trying to make amends, teaching our family the old ways, the rituals, the bargains that might appease the forest's anger. Did it work? Partially. The forest calmed, but it never chose another guardian. Until tonight. Until you. Sarah absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a mantle. So I'm supposed to, what? Live here forever? Never leave? Never have a life outside these trees? I don't know, Thomas admitted. Kalena's story is the only one I know, and it ended in tragedy. But you're different already. The forest didn't just accept you, it welcomed you. I saw it in the ritual, the way the roots embraced rather than ensnared, the way the light filled you instead of consuming you. Maybe you can succeed where Elena failed. Sarah stood pacing the small clearing. Her footsteps left faint luminescent prints on the forest floor that faded after a few seconds. I have a life, Thomas. I have a career, friends, family back in the city. I can't just disappear, can't you? Thomas asked quietly. What were you running from when you came here, Sarah? Why did you choose this remote assignment when you could have had your pick of prestigious positions? Sarah froze. He was right, of course. She had been running from a failed relationship, from the pressure of academia, from expectations she could never seem to meet. The forest had seemed like an escape, a place to lose herself for a while. She just hadn't expected it to be quite so literal. I need to think, she said finally. Need to understand what this means before I make any decisions. Thomas nodded. The forest will give you time, but not too much time. Every day without a guardian is a day it grows weaker, more vulnerable. There are forces in this world that would love nothing more than to see ancient places like this destroyed. What kind of forces? But before Thomas could answer, the forest erupted with warning. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment the forest was peaceful, humming with gentle magic. The next every tree seemed to scream in silent agony. Sarah gasped as pain lanced through her, sharp and hot, as if something had driven a spike into her chest. What? She began. But Thomas was already moving. Someone's crossed the outer boundary, he said, his voice tight with urgency. Someone with ill intent. The forest is calling to you, Sarah. It needs you. Sarah didn't understand how she knew, but suddenly she did. She could feel the intrusion like a splinter under her skin. 3 people, moving quickly through the eastern section of the forest, carrying something metallic and wrong. Chainsaws. They had chainsaws. I don't know what to do, she cried, panic rising in her throat. Yes, you do, Thomas said firmly, gripping her shoulders. Stop thinking with your human mind. Let the forest guide you. You're its guardian now. Act like it. Sarah closed her eyes and reached inward, past her fear and confusion, to that thrumming pulse of power that had settled in her core. The moment she touched it, the world exploded into sensation. She could feel every tree, every root, every living thing in Thornwood Forest. She was the deer bedded down in the northern thicket, the owl hunting in the western reaches, the ancient oak that had stood for 1,000 years at the forest's heart. She was everywhere and everything all at once, and she felt the intruders, 3 bright spots of hostile intent like burning embers on her skin. Without conscious thought, Sarah began to move. But she wasn't walking. She was flowing like water, like wind, like living shadow. The forest bent around her, trees leaning aside to clear her path, roots smoothing into stairs beneath her feet. She covered miles in what felt like seconds, Thomas struggling to keep pace far behind her. The intruders were setting up in a grove of old-growth cedars, their chainsaws already roaring to life. They were young men, college-aged, wearing expensive outdoor gear and recording everything on their phones. This is going to get so many views, one of them laughed. Urban exploration of forbidden forests? The algorithm loves this stuff. Plus cedarwood sells for crazy money, another added. We grab a few samples, make some cash, and we've got proof we were actually here. Win-win. Sarah felt the forest's rage, felt it wanting to lash out, to crush these foolish invaders. But she also felt something else, and her own humanity, her own mercy. These weren't evil people. They were just stupid and greedy, blinded by modern disconnection from nature. She could kill them. The forest would help her. She could feel the methods available to her, roots to trip and strangle, branches to fall and crush, 1,000 ways to make their deaths look like accidents. But that wasn't who she was. Sarah stepped into the clearing, and the chainsaws sputtered and died. The young men spun around and their faces went white with terror. Sarah knew what they saw. A woman wreathed in ethereal light, her eyes glowing with otherworldly power, her hair flowing as if in an invisible wind. She looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Leave, she said, and her voice carried the weight of centuries, the authority of the ancient forest itself. Leave now and never return. Tell no one what you've seen here. If you speak of this place, if you return, if you send others, the forest will not be merciful a second time. One of the men dropped his chainsaw and ran through. Ashing through the underbrush in blind panic, the other two hesitated for only a moment before following, their expensive equipment abandoned in their terror. Sarah watched them go, tracking them through her connection to the forest, until they crossed the boundary and stumbled back onto the public hiking trail, where other tourists found them babbling about ghosts and monsters in the woods. When they were gone, Sarah's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, as the adrenaline drained from her body. Thomas emerged from the shadows, breathing hard from his run. "Well done," he said, helping her to her feet. "Eleanor would have killed them." "I know," Sarah whispered. "I felt the forest wanting me to, but I couldn't. They were just foolish, not malicious." "That mercy," Thomas said thoughtfully, "might be what the forest has been waiting for." Eleanor was powerful, but she was also harsh. She saw the world in absolutes, those who respected the forest and those who didn't. Perhaps the forest needs something more nuanced now. Perhaps it needs someone who can bridge both worlds. Sarah looked down at her hands, still glowing faintly. "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said slowly. "This isn't about isolating myself from humanity. It's about protecting the forest from human ignorance and greed, while also protecting humans from the forest's more primal instincts." "A balance," Thomas agreed. "The question is, can you maintain it?" Before Sarah could answer, she felt another presence enter the forest. But this one was different. There was no hostile intent, no malice, just curiosity and something else. Recognition? "Someone else is here," she said. "Someone who knows about the Guardians." Thomas's face darkened. "Then we have a problem. Because there's only one person left in the world who should have that knowledge, and I thought he was dead." The stranger was waiting for them at the central grove, standing with perfect ease among the ancient trees, as if he belonged there. He was perhaps 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver threading through his dark hair. He wore practical hiking clothes, but there was something refined about him, scholarly. "Thomas Thornwood," the man said with a slight smile. "Still playing guardian at the gates, I see. Though I must say the role suits you less well than it once did." "Marcus Webb," Thomas replied, his voice cold. "I thought you'd learned your lesson about trespassing here." "Trespassing?" Marcus's eyebrows rose. "I'm hurt. I come bearing gifts, and this is how you greet an old friend?" "We were never friends." "No," Marcus agreed, "but we were colleagues once, before you decided that ancient knowledge should remain buried." His gaze shifted to Sarah, and his eyes widened slightly. "Ah, so it's true. The forest has chosen again. Remarkable." Sarah felt the forest's reaction to Marcus. Not hostile, exactly, but wary, watchful. This man had been here before, had studied these woods, but he had never tried to harm them. He was simply obsessed. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "Dr. Marcus Webb, at your service. Historian, anthropologist, and the world's foremost expert on forest guardians. A title that means very little since most people think I'm insane." He gave a self-deprecating shrug. "I've spent 20 years documenting every myth, legend, and eyewitness account of places like this. Sacred groves. Old-growth forests with unusual properties. Places where the boundary between the natural and supernatural grows thin. He's a treasure hunter," Thomas spat. "He wants to exploit the forest's power for his own gain." "I'm a scholar," Marcus corrected calmly. "And I want to understand, yes, but not to exploit. You know me better than that, Thomas, even if you refuse to admit it." Sarah felt the truth in his words through her connection to the forest. Marcus Webb was driven by genuine curiosity, by a deep love of ancient mysteries. But he was also ambitious, and ambition could be dangerous. "Why are you here?" she asked. Marcus pulled a weathered journal from his pack, its leather cover scarred with age. "Because you're going to need help. Being a guardian isn't just about feeling the forest and scaring off intruders. Helena Thornwood learned that the hard way. There are rituals to maintain, ancient bargains to uphold, seasonal obligations that must be met. The forest expects certain things from its guardian, and if you don't know what they are, the bond weakens," Sarah finished. "The forest feels betrayed again." "Exactly." Marcus held out the journal. "This belonged to Elena. I've been searching for it for years, and I finally tracked it down to a private collector in Prague. It contains everything she learned during her time as guardian, the rituals, the rules, the responsibilities. Consider it a guidebook for your new position." Thomas moved to intercept, but Sarah held up a hand. "Let me see it." She took the journal, and the moment her fingers touched its cover, power surged through her. The forest recognized this book, remembered the woman who had written it. Sarah opened it carefully, and Elena's handwriting sprawled across the first page. "To whoever finds this, the forest has chosen you, and you must be either very lucky or very foolish. Probably both. What follows is everything I learned during my 50 years as guardian, written in the hope that my mistakes might guide your success. The forest is beautiful and terrible, generous and demanding. It will give you power beyond imagining, but the price is higher than you can possibly understand. Choose wisely. Choose better than I did." Sarah looked up at Marcus. "Why give this to me? You could have used this information for your research, published it, made your career." "Because some things are more important than careers," Marcus said quietly. "I've seen what happens when ancient forests fall. The Chisara Grove in Romania, the Whisper Woods in Scotland, the dark trees of Osaka, all gone in the last century, destroyed by logging or development or simple human ignorance. Each time a sacred forest dies, something precious is lost from the world. I don't want that to happen here." "Pretty words," Thomas muttered, "but I don't trust him." "You don't have to trust me," Marcus replied, "but Sarah needs information I can provide. I've studied 12 other guardian-protected forests around the world. I know the patterns, the common pitfalls. I can help her avoid Elena's fate." Sarah felt torn. Thomas's mistrust was well-founded. Marcus clearly wanted something from this arrangement, even if it was just the opportunity to observe and document. But he was also right. She knew nothing about being a guardian, and Elena's journal, while helpful, was just one perspective. "What do you want in return?" she asked bluntly. Marcus smiled. "Honest, I like that. I want to study you, to document the bond between guardian and forest. Not to exploit it, but to preserve the knowledge. If something happens to you, if the forest needs another guardian a century from now, future generations should have more than fragmentary legends to guide them. They should have a true record." "Absolutely not," Thomas said. "This is sacred knowledge." "It shouldn't be written down?" Marcus interrupted. Elena thought the same thing at first. That's in her journal too. But then she realized that oral traditions fail, that families forget, that knowledge dies with its keepers. She started documenting everything precisely, so this wouldn't be lost. "I'm just asking to continue her work." Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out to the forest, asking its opinion. The response came not in words, but in feelings, curiosity tinged with caution. The forest was interested in Marcus, but uncertain. It would leave the decision to her first true decision as guardian. "You can stay," Sarah said finally, ignoring Thomas's sound of protest. "You can observe and document, but you publish nothing without my permission. And if I ever feel that you're here for the wrong reasons, if the forest tells me you mean us harm, you leave and never come back." "Agreed," Marcus bowed slightly. "Agreed. You won't regret this, Sarah." "I already do," Thomas muttered, but he didn't argue further. Sarah opened Elena's journal again, skimming through pages of elegant handwriting. There was so much here. Rituals for the solstices and equinoxes, methods for healing damaged sections of the forest, techniques for communicating with the wildlife, warnings about various threats. One entry caught her eye. Month 6. I performed the renewal ritual tonight. The forest demands this every new moon. A gift freely given, a sharing of essence. I cut my palm and let my blood water the roots of the heart tree. In return, the forest strengthened our bond. I can feel it now, even in my dreams, always present, always aware. Sometimes I wonder if I'm becoming more forest than human. Sometimes I don't care. Sarah looked up sharply. "The forest feeds on guardian blood?" "Not feeds," Marcus said quickly. "It's more like a communion. You share your life force and it shares its power. But it has to be freely given, with no resentment or reluctance. Elena writes about this extensively. It's one of the core responsibilities." Sarah felt a chill. She had agreed to protect the forest, to be its guardian, but the reality of what that meant was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a mystical connection or a cool superpower. It was a binding, a sacrifice, a surrender of autonomy. "I need time," she said. "I need to read this journal to understand what I've gotten myself into." "Of course," Marcus said, "but there's something you should know. The new moon is in 3 days. If you don't perform the renewal ritual, the bond will start to weaken. You'll lose your connection to the forest, and it will begin looking for another guardian. 3 days, Sarah repeated numbly. 3 days to decide if I'm willing to bleed for a forest. To decide if you're willing to live, Thomas corrected gently. Because this bond isn't just responsibility, Sarah. It's life. I saw Elena when she was guardian. She was more alive, more vibrant, more wholly herself than any person I've ever met. Yes, there's sacrifice, but there's also extraordinary beauty. Sarah tucked the journal under her arm and looked up at the ancient trees surrounding them, their branches swaying in a wind she couldn't feel. Through her connection, she could sense their age, their wisdom, their patient endurance through centuries of human folly. She thought about her life before, the cramped city apartment, the cutthroat academic politics, the constant pressure to publish or perish. She thought about the loneliness, the feeling that she was going through the motions of a life rather than truly living one. And she thought about the moment in the grove, when the forest had accepted her, when she had felt every tree and creature as part of herself. The overwhelming sense of belonging, of purpose, of being exactly where she was meant to be. "Show me to the heart tree," she said quietly. "I need to meditate, think, whatever guardians do." Thomas nodded and began walking deeper into the forest. Marcus fell into step beside Sarah, maintaining a respectful silence. But she could feel his curiosity radiating off him like heat. They walked for what felt like hours, though Sarah's sense of time had become strange since the bonding. The forest shifted around them, paths opening and closing, until finally they emerged into a clearing that made Sarah's breath catch. The heart tree was impossible. It had to be thousands of years old, its trunk so massive that 20 people holding hands couldn't have circled it. Its roots spread across the clearing, like the veins of some great beast, and its branches reached up so high that they seemed to brush the sky itself. The bark was silver-white, luminescent even in daylight, and covered in markings, symbols carved by countless generations of guardians. Perhaps, or messages written by the forest itself. Elena made her blood oath here, Thomas said softly. "Every guardian has." Sarah approached the tree slowly, reverently. She could feel its power, vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. This tree had been old when Rome was young, had watched empires rise and fall, had endured through ice ages and warming periods and everything between, and it was waiting for her answer. Sarah placed her palm against the bark, and the tree's consciousness flooded into her. Not words or images, but pure emotion, patience, curiosity, hope. The forest had been lonely without a guardian, had felt incomplete, like a kingdom without its sovereign. It wanted her, needed her, would give her everything in exchange for her commitment. "I need to be alone," Sarah said. Thomas hesitated, but Marcus touched his arm. "Come on, let the woman think." They left, and Sarah was finally, truly alone with her decision. She sat at the base of the heart tree, Elena's journal in her lap, and began to read. Year 1. I have been guardian for 12 months now, and I still don't fully understand what I've become. The forest speaks to me in dreams, shows me memories of ages past. Last night I saw the first humans who entered these woods thousands of years ago. They were afraid, as humans should be in the presence of the truly wild, but they were also respectful. They asked permission. They gave thanks. They understood that the forest was alive in ways that transcended simple biology. The modern humans don't understand this. They see trees as resources, as obstacles, as scenery. They've forgotten the old truths. Sometimes I think that's why the forest needs guardians, not to protect it from humans, but to remind humans that some things are still sacred. Sarah turned the page carefully. The journal was organized chronologically, chronicling Elena's journey from confused new guardian to confident protector. But there were also practical sections, detailed instructions for rituals, lists of medicinal plants and their uses, sketches of the forest's geography, with notes about particularly important or dangerous areas. The renewal ritual: perform this every new moon without fail. Go to the heart tree at midnight. Bring no iron, no technology, nothing made by human hands except a blade. Cut your left palm, the side closest to your heart. Let the blood fall on the roots. Speak the words: I give freely what the forest needs. My blood for its strength, my life for its life, my will bound to its will. The forest will respond. You will feel weaker for a day or two after, but then the bond will be stronger than before. Warning: never perform this ritual with resentment or anger in your heart. The forest will sense it and the bond will corrupt. A corrupted guardian is a dangerous thing, neither fully human nor fully forest, driven mad by the conflicting loyalties. I found records of 3 corrupted guardians in the old archives. All had to be put down. For everyone's safety, Sarah shivered. The journal made it clear that being a guardian wasn't just a magical gift. It was a sacred responsibility with deadly consequences for failure. She read on, skipping ahead to the sections about Elena's personal life. Year 20. Thomas Thornwood brought me flowers today. Not the first time. He's been courting me for months now, with the patient persistence of someone who knows exactly what he wants. I've been resisting, telling myself that a guardian can't afford such attachments. But gods, I'm lonely. The forest is a demanding companion, always present, always needing something. Sometimes I yearn for simple human connection. Year 25, I married Thomas today. The village priest performed the ceremony at dawn, in the clearing just outside the forest boundary. I wore my mother's dress, yellow as summer sunlight. Thomas wept when he saw me. The forest wasn't pleased. I felt its jealousy, sharp as thorns, but I convinced it that this changes nothing. I am still its guardian. I still give everything I have. Surely I can be both wife and protector? Year 27, I'm pregnant. I haven't told Thomas yet, though I think he suspects. The forest knows, of course. It knows everything about me now. But its reaction troubles me. There's something hostile in the way it watches me, as if it sees the baby as a threat, a distraction from my duties. I need to convince it that I can do both. I need to believe I can do both. Year 28. The baby came early. A girl, small but healthy. We named her Margaret. Thomas is overjoyed, but I feel torn in ways I can't explain. Every moment I spend nursing her, soothing her cries, teaching her to smile. Every moment away from the forest makes the bond ache. The forest is angry now. I can feel its resentment like a physical weight. Trees that once welcomed me now seem to lean away. Animals avoid my touch. I've tried performing extra rituals, giving more blood, spending longer hours in the grove, but nothing seems to appease it. Year 30. I made a terrible mistake. The forest demanded I choose, and I chose wrong. I thought I could have both my family and my duty, but the forest knows now that my heart is divided. It's withdrawing from me, slowly but inexorably. The bond weakens daily. Soon I won't be able to feel it at all, and without a guardian the forest will die, or worse. It will go wild, attacking anyone who enters, becoming the monster that superstitious villagers always feared it might be. I've tried everything. Pleaded, bargained, offered greater sacrifices. But the forest's logic is absolute. A guardian must be wholly devoted, or they are no guardian at all. I understand now why there are so few of us in the histories. Most people can't make that choice. Most people shouldn't have to. Year 31. I'm no longer guardian. The forest has rejected me completely. I can't feel it anymore, can't sense its needs or hear its voice. It's like losing a limb, losing a sense. I'm less than I was, diminished in ways I can barely articulate. But I have my family, my husband who loves me, my daughter who is growing into a remarkable young woman. I tell myself it was worth it. I try to believe it. For the next guardian, whoever you may be, don't make my mistake. Don't let yourself love anything as much as you love the forest. Don't allow any loyalty to supersede your duty. It sounds harsh, perhaps even cruel. But that's the truth of this calling. A guardian must be willing to stand alone. Sarah closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Elena's tragedy was written in every page, every word. She had been torn between love and duty, and in trying to honor both had lost them both. But did it have to be that way? Sarah thought about the forest's reaction when those intruders had entered with their chainsaws. The forest had wanted violence, had wanted blood. But Sarah had shown mercy, and the forest had accepted her choice. Maybe that was the key. Maybe a new kind of guardian could reshape the old rules, or maybe she was being naive. Maybe Elena had thought the same thing. "What do you think I should do?" Sarah asked the heart tree, not expecting an answer. But the tree responded in its wordless way. Not instructions or demands, but something simpler: trust. The forest was asking her to trust it, and trusting her in return. They would figure this out together, Guardian and forest, finding a new balance for a new age. Sarah stood, decision made. She would perform the renewal ritual at the new moon. She would commit to being guardian, to protecting this sacred place. But she would do it her way, maintaining her humanity even as she embraced the forest's power. If that led to tragedy, then so be it. But if it led to something new, something better than what came before, well, that was a risk worth taking. She walked back through the forest, and the trees bent to light her way. When she emerged at the boundary, Thomas and Marcus were waiting, sitting on opposite sides of a small fire, not speaking to each other. "I'll do it," Sarah said. "I'll be guardian, but things are going to be different this time." Thomas's face split into a relieved smile. "Welcome, guardian," he said formally. Marcus raised his coffee cup in salute. "This is going to be fascinating to document." Sarah rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. "You two are going to have to learn to get along. I'm going to need both of you." "Why?" Thomas asked, puzzled. "Because I'm not going to isolate myself like Elena did. I'm going to find a way to be guardian while staying connected to the human world. And that means having people who can bridge both. A keeper of traditions," she nodded to Thomas, "and a scholar of the modern world," she nodded to Marcus. "Together, maybe we can prevent history from repeating itself." "That's a dangerous idea," Thomas warned. "Good," Sarah replied. "The best ideas usually are." And deep in the forest, the heart tree hummed with something that might have been approval. This is the first part of Sarah's journey as guardian of Thornwood Forest. The story explores themes of duty versus love, tradition versus innovation, and the eternal human struggle to balance competing loyalties. More chapters will follow Sarah as she navigates her new role, faces threats both human and supernatural, and attempts to forge a new path that honors both the forest's ancient needs and her own humanity. Sarah felt it too, a thrumming awareness beneath her skin, as if roots had grown not just from the tree, but through her very being. The oak she had planted, or perhaps that had planted itself through her, pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. "What am I?" she whispered, pressing her palm against the new oak's bark. It was warm, alive in a way that went beyond mere biology. Thomas approached slowly, his weathered face filled with wonder and something like reverence. "The forest doesn't just take Sarah. Sometimes, rarely, it finds someone who can bridge the worlds, the human and the wild. You're not a guardian. You're not a sacrifice." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You're a threshold." The witness oak seemed to sigh, its ancient branches creaking with approval. Through the connection, this strange, verdant bond, Sarah could sense the forest's vast consciousness. It showed her things, roots communicating beneath the soil, the slow memory of centuries, the pain of loss and the joy of new growth. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Thomas smiled, though his eyes were troubled. "Now the hard part begins. The forest has needs, Sarah, and there are those who won't understand what you've become. Those who will see you as a threat or worse, as a tool to be used." The young oak's leaves rustled, though there was no wind, and Sarah understood. She had made her choice in that clearing, and the forest had answered in kind. She was no longer quite human, but she hadn't lost herself either. She had become something in between, something necessary. The young oak's leaves rustled, though there was no wind, and Sarah understood. She had made her choice in that clearing, and the forest had answered in kind. She was no longer quite human, but she hadn't lost herself either. She had become something in between, something necessary. The seasons turned differently for her now. She felt autumn approaching not as a date on a calendar, but as an ache in her bones, a whisper in her blood. The trees prepared for their long sleep, and she found herself drawn to their roots, pressing her palms against rough bark, listening to the slow conversations that happened beneath the soil. In town, people noticed the changes but couldn't quite name them. Sarah's hair had taken on an unusual sheen, catching light like leaves after rain. Her eyes held depths that made people uncomfortable if they looked too long. Children, though, seemed drawn to her. They would follow her through the market, asking questions about birds and stones and why the sky changed colors. She still lived in her cottage at the forest's edge, but the boundary between inside and outside had grown permeable. Vines crept through her windows, not invasive but companionable. A fox made its den beneath her porch. At night, she would wake to find moss growing in the creases of her palms. blooming there like tiny green stars, only to fade by morning. The forest called her deeper now, more often. There were sick trees that needed her touch, clearings where the balance had shifted wrong, streams that had forgotten their courses. She walked barefoot even in winter, and the cold didn't bite her the way it used to. Snow melted where she stepped, leaving trails of green shoots in her wake. One evening, as the first stars appeared, an old woman came to her door. She was bent with age, leaning heavily on a staff made of blackthorn, but her eyes were sharp and knowing. "You're the new guardian," the old woman said. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded slowly. "I didn't know there were others. There have always been others. In every forest, by every mountain, near every living thing that needs protecting." The old woman smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too many. "We are the threshold keepers, the ones who chose to stand between. How long have you—" 83 years since I made my choice. Time moves strangely for us. We age, but differently. We die, but only when the land releases us. She studied Sarah with those ancient eyes. "You're young yet. The forest is still deciding how much of you to keep, how much to return." Sarah felt a flutter of fear, the first she'd felt since that day in the clearing. What if it keeps too much? Then you become like the old trees, rooted, eternal, but no longer able to move between worlds. The old woman's expression softened. "But I don't think that's your path. The forest chose you because you can walk in both places. It needs someone who remembers what it's like to be human, who can speak for it to those who've forgotten how to listen." They talked through the night, the old woman sharing the wisdom of her decades. She taught Sarah the old names for things, the true names that the forest recognized. She showed her how to read the patterns in bark and moss, how to sense the deep sickness before it spread, how to ask permission before taking anything from the growing world. As dawn broke, the old woman stood to leave. She seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. "My forest is in the north, in the mountains. It's calling me home now. My time is nearly complete." She placed a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Trust the path you're on. The forest doesn't make mistakes, even when we think it does." Sarah watched her disappear into the morning mist, moving with surprising speed for someone so ancient. She understood now that she wasn't alone in her transformation. Scattered across the world were others like her, watchers, guardians, bridges between the human world and the wild one. She turned back to her forest, feeling its awakening with the sunrise. A deer emerged from the undergrowth, unafraid, and touched its nose to her hand. Somewhere deep in the woods, the old oak was humming its approval. Sarah smiled. She had lost her old life, yes, but she had gained something immeasurable, a purpose that stretched beyond herself, roots that went deeper than blood, and a belonging that would last as long as the forest needed her. She was the guardian now, the threshold keeper, the voice for those who couldn't speak, and the forest in its ancient wisdom had chosen well. The first winter as a guardian tested Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. The old woman's words echoed in her mind as the forest settled into its dormant phase, and she felt the pull of sleep herself. Not human sleep, but something deeper, more primal. It frightened her at first, this urge to curl among the roots and let the world fade away. She resisted it, forcing herself to stay awake, to keep moving. But the forest grew restless with her stubbornness. It was Marcus who found her one December morning, collapsed at the base of the old oak, her skin pale as birch bark, her breathing so shallow he thought at first she was dead. He was one of the few townspeople who still ventured into the forest, a logger's son who had known these woods all his life. He'd watched Sarah's transformation from a distance with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Sarah!" He shook her shoulder, and her eyes opened, but they weren't quite her eyes. They were the color of pine needles, depthless and ancient. "The forest needs to rest," she whispered. "And I need to rest with it. You'll freeze to death." A small smile touched her lips. "Don't think I can die that way anymore." But Marcus wouldn't leave her. He built a shelter around her sleeping form, using fallen branches and his own coat. He brought her soup and bread, though she barely ate. And he talked to her, telling her about the town, about his sister's new baby, about the spring that would come again. Slowly, Sarah learned to navigate this new rhythm. She let herself sink into the half-sleep the forest required, but she kept one foot in the human world, tethered by Marcus's visits and stories. When she finally emerged fully in late February, the forest hummed with approval. And Marcus had become something unexpected, a friend who knew both sides of her. "You came back," he said simply when she walked to his logging camp. "Fully herself again. I learned to walk the middle path," she replied. "Thank you for helping me find it." Spring brought more than new growth. It brought others like Sarah. The first was a young man named Kieran, barely 20, who stumbled into her clearing with wild eyes and bark growing from his fingertips. He was terrified, fighting his transformation with everything he had. "Make it stop," he begged. "I didn't ask for this." "I don't want it." Sarah recognized the panic in his voice. She had felt it herself once. She sat with him beneath the oak, holding his hands despite the thorns that sprouted from his palms. "Tell me what happened," she said gently. His story tumbled out. He'd been hiking in the mountains, had gotten lost, was dying of thirst when he found a spring. But it wasn't just water. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting. He'd drunk deeply and the forest had claimed him. "You did ask for it," Sarah said softly. "Maybe not with words, but with need. The forest only chooses those who are ready to hear it, even if they don't know they're listening. I have a life, a girlfriend, a job in the city." His voice cracked. "I can't just disappear into the woods. You don't have to." Sarah showed him her cottage, her careful balance between worlds. "There are others like us. We're guardians, yes, but we're still human. Still ourselves. You learn to walk between." Kieran stayed with her for 3 months, learning what the old woman had taught Sarah, learning to accept his new nature rather than fight it. When he finally left to return to his mountains, he moved with new confidence, no longer at war with himself. A month later, a woman named Delilah arrived, older, maybe 40, with silver threading her dark hair and eyes that had already accepted what she'd become. She'd been a botanist before her transformation, and the forest had chosen her to tend a dying woodland near the coast. "I heard there was someone who could teach me," she said without preamble. "The whispers in the roots spoke of you." Sarah learned from Delilah too. The older woman had a scientific understanding of plant systems that complemented Sarah's intuitive connection. Together, they developed techniques for healing blighted trees, for coaxing streams back to their courses, for reading the subtle signs of ecological imbalance. "We should create a network," Delilah suggested one evening as they sat by Sarah's fire. "All the guardians connected. We could learn from each other, warn each other of threats." "How?" "We're scattered across the world," Delilah smiled, pressing her palm against the wooden floor. "The roots run everywhere, Sarah. The mycelium connects all forests. We just need to learn to listen better." Over the following year, they did exactly that. Sarah learned to send messages through the root network, to sense other guardians across vast distances. Slowly, a community formed, not a physical one, but something deeper. A web of consciousness spread across continents, guardians sharing knowledge, warnings, and support. Sarah met them in dreams that weren't quite dreams. A man in the Amazon who could speak with jaguars. A woman in Siberia who walked with wolves. A teenager in Japan who tended a sacred forest around an ancient shrine. An elder in Australia who knew the song lines and taught her how all living things carried music in their bones. She was no longer alone. None of them were. It started small, a patch of trees in the eastern section of her forest that wouldn't wake properly from winter. Their leaves came in stunted and yellow, and when Sarah pressed her hand to their bark, she felt something she'd never encountered before. A wrongness that went deeper than disease or drought. She called for Delilah, and together they examined the trees. The older woman's face grew grave. "This isn't natural. Something's poisoning the soil." They traced the contamination to its source, a new development at the forest's edge. A company had begun construction on what they called an eco-resort, but their digging had broken into an old landfill, sealed and forgotten decades ago. Toxins were leaching into the groundwater. Sarah's first instinct was to stop them, to call up the forest's wrath, to make the earth itself reject their intrusion. She felt the power coiled within her, ready to unleash, but Delilah caught her arm. "That's not the Guardian's way. We protect the balance, remember? We stand between. That means finding solutions, not just fighting battles. How do I find a solution when they're killing the forest? You speak. You show them what they're doing. You be the voice." It went against every instinct Sarah had developed. The forest part of her wanted to act through force, through natural consequence. But the human part, the part Marcus had helped her keep alive, understood Delilah's wisdom. Sarah went to the construction site. She tried to speak with the foreman, but he dismissed her as a tree hugger and a nuisance. She tried the company office, but they had permits and lawyers and no interest in listening to a strange woman who claimed to speak for trees. Frustrated, she returned to her cottage to find Marcus waiting. "I heard what happened," he said. "I think I can help." Marcus, it turned out, had been doing more than logging. He'd gone back to school, studying forestry management and environmental law. He knew the system, knew how to make people listen. "You're the evidence," he told Sarah. "You can show them exactly what's dying and why. I'll help you document it in ways they can't ignore." Together they built a case. Sarah identified every affected tree, every contaminated spring, every creature forced from its habitat. Marcus translated her knowledge into scientific reports, photographs, water samples. He filed complaints with environmental agencies, contacted local news stations, organized community meetings. The construction company fought back. They hired their own experts who disputed the findings. They claimed Sarah was a radical environmentalist with no credentials. They tried to paint Marcus as a traitor to the working people who needed the jobs the resort would bring. But Sarah had something they didn't: the truth, witnessed by someone who could speak in two languages, the language of the forest and the language of humans. And she had the children. The town's children had always been drawn to Sarah. They trusted her in ways their parents didn't. When she told them the forest was sick, they believed her. When she showed them the dying trees, they cried. When she asked them to speak up, they found their voices. It was an 8-year-old girl named Emma who turned the tide. At a town hall meeting, she stood up and asked the company's representative a simple question. "If you're poisoning the trees, aren't you poisoning us too?" "We drink the same water." The room fell silent, because Emma was right and everyone knew it. The contamination didn't stop at the forest's edge. It was in the aquifer that fed the town's wells. Within a week, the construction was halted. Within a month, cleanup crews were excavating the old landfill properly. The company threatened lawsuits but eventually settled out of court, paying for extensive environmental remediation. Sarah had won, but not through force. She'd won by being exactly what the old woman had said she was meant to be: a bridge, a translator, someone who could walk between worlds and speak the truth in both. But victory came with consequences Sarah hadn't anticipated. The town knew who she was now. Not just the strange woman who lived at the forest's edge, but the person who'd stopped the development, who'd cost the company money, who'd killed jobs. Some people saw her as a hero. Others saw her as a threat. The logging company Marcus worked for fired him. Too much of a liability, they said. Too sympathetic to the environmentalists. Sarah found him sitting by the stream, anger and hurt warring in his expression. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is my fault, no." He shook his head firmly. "I made my choice. I'd make it again. Some things matter more than a paycheck. What will you do?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow. "I don't know, maybe you could teach me what you know about the forest. Maybe I could help other guardians, be someone who understands both sides." Sarah felt the forest's approval ripple through her. "Yes, I think that's exactly what's needed." But the backlash continued. Someone spray-painted Tree Witch on her cottage wall. She'd find garbage dumped at the forest's edge, a passive-aggressive reminder that not everyone appreciated her protection. Once she came home to find her garden trampled, her vegetables destroyed. The forest urged her to retaliate, to show them what it meant to anger a guardian. And part of her wanted to. It would be so easy to lead the vandals astray in the woods, to let them face the consequences of disrespecting the wild places. But she remembered the old woman's warning. The forest chose you because you can walk in both places. Instead, she invited the town to her cottage. She opened her home to anyone who wanted to see who she really was, what she really did. She answered questions, showed them her garden, explained how she monitored the forest's health, how protecting the ecosystem protected them too. Many people came, some out of curiosity, some out of suspicion, some out of genuine interest. The children came in droves, eager to see the magic up close. Mrs. Patterson, the oldest resident of the town, arrived leaning on her walker. Sarah had always been wary of her. She was known as a gossip, a woman who'd never had a kind word for anyone unusual, but Mrs. Patterson surprised her. "I remember," the old woman said quietly, looking around the cottage with its vine-covered walls and moss-growing windowsills. "When I was a girl, there was a woman like you. She lived in these same woods. We called her the Forest Keeper. She helped my mother when I was sick with fever, brought herbs, knew things the doctor didn't. I never forgot her kindness." She looked at Sarah with watery but sharp eyes. "The town needs people like you, even if they're too foolish to know it. Don't let them drive you away." It was a turning point. Mrs. Patterson's endorsement meant something in a small town where memories ran long and grudges ran longer. The vandalism stopped. People began bringing Sarah their concerns about the forest. Strange sightings, unusual animal behavior, sick trees in their yards. She was becoming, slowly, a part of the community rather than separate from it. Not despite her strangeness, but because of what that strangeness could offer. 2 years into her guardianship, Sarah received a distress call through the Root network, but this one was different. It came from a guardian she'd never met, in a forest she'd never seen, and it carried a terror that made her bones ache. "They're cutting everything. They won't stop. There's nothing I can do. I'm failing." The message came from somewhere in Southeast Asia, from a guardian who called himself Sorn. Through the network, Sarah felt his anguish as if it were her own. An ancient rainforest was being clear-cut at an unprecedented rate, and Sorn was watching his entire world disappear, powerless to stop it. Sarah sent messages to the other guardians. "Can anyone help him?" The responses came slowly, tinged with the same helplessness. "I'm holding my own forest by a thread. I'm dealing with fires. I have my own battles. No one could go." No one had the strength to spare except Sarah. "You can't," Marcus said when she told him her intention. "That's halfway around the world. Your forest needs you here. My forest is healthy now, healing. You can watch over it. I'm not a guardian." "No, but you understand both worlds. You can be the bridge while I'm gone." She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and warm. "I have to go. If I don't, Sorn will be lost and that entire ecosystem will die. That's not balance. That's not what we're for." Delilah, consulted through the Root network, agreed. Sometimes being a guardian means leaving your post to help another. "The forest will understand. But Sarah, be careful. Some battles can't be won. Sometimes we can only witness and grieve." The journey itself was surreal. Sarah had barely left her forest in 2 years, and now she was boarding planes, crossing oceans, moving through airports that felt like alien worlds with their artificial lights and recycled air. She felt disconnected from the earth, untethered, and by the time she reached Thailand, she was weak and disoriented. But the moment she set foot in the rainforest, strength flooded back. This forest was different from hers, hotter, denser, louder with life, but it recognized her. She was a guardian, and all forests knew their own. She found Sorn in a small village at the forest's edge. He was younger than she expected, maybe 25, with exhausted eyes and hands that trembled as he offered her tea. "You came," he said in halting English. "I didn't think. I sent the message in desperation. I didn't expect. Tell me everything." The story was complicated, layered with economic pressures, government corruption, and corporate greed. Their palm oil company had purchased logging rights to thousands of acres. The local people depended on the forest for their survival, but they also desperately needed money, jobs, a future for their children. The company promised both and delivered neither. Sorn had tried everything Sarah had tried: documentation, appeals to authorities, attempts to raise awareness. But this was a country where environmental protection took a back seat to economic development, where one voice crying out for conservation was easily silenced. "I thought about stopping them the other way," Sorn confessed. "Using my power, making the forest fight back. But I'm not strong enough to stop them all, and if I hurt someone, I become the monster they already think I am." Sarah understood his dilemma intimately. "Show me," she said. They walked to the edge of the clear-cut, and Sarah's heart broke. Where there should have been towering trees and a canopy alive with birds and monkeys, there was only devastation. The earth had been scraped raw, leaving behind a wasteland of stumps and erosion. The few remaining trees at the boundary looked traumatized, their leaves brown, their bark weeping sap like tears. Sarah pressed her hands to the wounded earth and felt the forest's agony, but also its resilience, its desperate will to survive. "This isn't over," she said. What Sarah learned in those weeks in Southeast Asia, changed her understanding of what it meant to be a guardian. This wasn't a problem she could solve alone, or even with Sorn's help. It required something bigger. She met with the village elders first, with Sorn translating. They were wary of her at first, another outsider coming to tell them what to do with their land. But when she spoke, she didn't lecture. She listened. "What do you need?" she asked them. Not what do activists think you need, not what companies promise you. What do you actually need to live well and keep your forest? The answers were practical. Better markets for sustainable forest products. Ecotourism that would actually benefit the village. Support for traditional practices that had sustained them for generations. Protection from company intimidation. Someone to speak for them to the government who would actually be heard. Sarah spent days just listening, learning, understanding. And slowly, a plan formed. She contacted every guardian in the network. "I need your help. Not to come here, but to apply pressure from where you are." And they did. The Guardian in Australia connected her with international environmental groups. The one in Canada helped her reach journalists who specialized in corporate accountability. The Japanese Guardian knew government officials who cared about international conservation. The American Guardians organized social media campaigns and consumer boycotts. Marcus worked from home, using his growing expertise to create detailed reports on the ecological cost of the palm oil operation. Documentation that couldn't be ignored or dismissed, but the most powerful weapon turned out to be the village itself. With Sarah's help, they documented their own story, not as victims, but as people fighting for their right to choose their future. They showed how the company had broken its promises, how the destruction of the forest was destroying their culture, their food sources, their way of life. A young woman from the village, a teacher named Mali, became the face of the movement. She spoke at international conferences, her voice clear and uncompromising. "This isn't about choosing between people and nature. We are part of nature. When you destroy our forest, you destroy us." The pressure mounted. The palm oil company found its products boycotted in major markets. Shareholders began demanding answers. International environmental groups filed lawsuits. And the Thai government, embarrassed by the global attention, finally stepped in. It took 6 months. 6 months of fighting, organizing, speaking out. 6 months of Sarah living between two worlds more literally than ever. Guardian and activist, forest speaker and human advocate. The victory wasn't total. The company didn't leave entirely, but the clear-cutting stopped. A large portion of the remaining forest was designated as protected. The village was granted legal recognition of their traditional forest rights, and a fund was established to support sustainable livelihoods that didn't require destroying the ecosystem. On her last day, Sorn walked with her through the forest that had survived. "You saved it," he said. "We saved it," Sarah corrected. "All of us. That's the lesson, Sorn. Guardians were never meant to stand alone. We're strongest when we remember we're part of a community, of other guardians, of the people who live in and around our forests, of everyone who understands that protecting Nature means protecting ourselves." Sorn smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, the exhaustion was gone from his eyes. "I won't forget." Coming home felt like waking from a dream that had been both nightmare and revelation. Sarah's forest greeted her with a surge of joy that brought tears to her eyes, every tree reaching toward her, welcoming her back. But she had changed, and so had her understanding of her role. Marcus met her at the cottage, which he'd maintained carefully in her absence. He'd also been busy in other ways. "I've been thinking," he said after they'd shared a meal, and she'd caught up on 6 months of forest news. "What you did in Thailand, connecting people, helping them organize, using the Guardian network to apply pressure, that's something that could work other places. For other Guardians facing similar fights, what are you suggesting?" "A foundation, an organization, something that connects human resources, lawyers, scientists, journalists, activists, with Guardians who need help. A formal network." Sarah considered this, feeling the weight of it. It would mean stepping further into the human world, taking on responsibilities beyond her forest. But hadn't she learned that's exactly what being a Guardian required? We'd need funding, structure, people who understand both worlds. "I've been working on that too." Marcus pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I've talked to Delilah, to some of the other Guardians. There are people willing to help. Some of us who aren't Guardians ourselves but want to support the work. Over the following months, they built it together, the Threshold Institute. Its mission was simple: to support the people who stood between human civilization and the wild world, ensuring neither was sacrificed for the other. Delilah came to help establish the scientific protocols. Mali from Thailand joined remotely to share what she'd learned about community organizing. Other Guardians sent knowledge, resources, connections, and slowly, other humans like Marcus emerged, people who understood that humanity's survival depended on protecting the natural world, who were willing to be bridges themselves. The Institute's first major project was creating a rapid response network. When a Guardian sent out a distress call, the Institute could mobilize resources immediately. Legal help, media attention, scientific documentation, financial support, whatever was needed. The second project was education, teaching young Guardians like Kieran how to navigate their dual nature, teaching communities living near protected forests how to thrive without destroying their ecosystem, teaching children everywhere how to hear the voice of the living world. Sarah found herself traveling more, speaking at conferences, training new Guardians, consulting on conservation projects. It was exhausting, pulling her away from her forest regularly, but each time she returned home, pressed her hands to her oak tree and felt its approval, she knew she was on the right path. "You're not just a Guardian anymore," Marcus observed one evening. "You're becoming something else. A teacher, a leader?" Sarah considered this, watching fireflies dance at the forest's edge. "Maybe I'm just being what I was always meant to be. A bridge that others can walk across, a voice that helps others find their own voices." But not everyone approved of what Sarah and the Institute were doing. There were powerful interests that depended on unrestricted access to natural resources, companies whose profits relied on exploitation, governments that saw environmental protection as a barrier to economic growth, and some of them decided that Guardians had become too much of a threat. The first attack came through the network itself. Sarah was deep in meditation, traveling through the root system to check on a Guardian in the Congo, when she felt it, a wrongness spreading through the mycelial web, a corruption that turned the messages from other Guardians into screams of pain. She pulled back immediately, gasping, but the damage was done. All across the world, Guardians collapsed, their connection to the network suddenly toxic, poisonous. "What's happening?" Marcus found her on the floor of her cottage, trembling, her nose bleeding from the psychic backlash. "Someone's weaponized the network," she managed. "They've found a way to hurt us through our connection to the forests." Over the next days, the scope of the attack became clear. 7 Guardians were dead, killed by whatever poison had been injected into the root network. Dozens more were injured, their abilities damaged, their connection to their forests compromised, and the forests themselves were suffering, recoiling from the contamination. Delilah, working with every scientific tool at her disposal, finally identified the weapon, a genetically modified fungus designed to infiltrate mycelial networks and release a neurotoxin that affected both plant and animal nervous systems. It was sophisticated, deliberately engineered, and could only have been created by someone who understood exactly how Guardians connected to their forests. "Someone's been studying us," Delilah said grimly, "learning how we work so they could figure out how to kill us." The Institute went into crisis mode. They needed to find who was behind the attack, develop a countermeasure, and protect the remaining Guardians before more died. Sarah found herself coordinating a response unlike anything she'd trained for. Not a battle against humans or a fight to save a forest, but a war that targeted the very essence of what Guardians were. Marcus led the investigation into the attack's origins, using his network of contacts and his understanding of corporate structures. What he found chilled them all. A coalition had formed, representatives from logging companies, mining operations, agribusiness giants, and even some government agencies. They called themselves the Progress Alliance, and their stated mission was removing barriers to economic development. But their real mission was eliminating Guardians. "They see you as the enemy," Marcus explained, showing Sarah the documents he'd uncovered. "Not because you're protecting forests, but because you're too effective at it. You're organizing, networking, winning battles they used to win easily. You've become a threat to their bottom line. So they decided to commit genocide," Sarah said bitterly. "They don't see it that way. They've convinced themselves you're not really human anymore. that you're acceptable casualties in the name of progress. The betrayal Sarah felt was profound. She had worked so hard to be a bridge, to show people that protecting nature didn't mean abandoning humanity. And now she was being hunted for exactly that reason. But grief and anger would have to wait. Guardians were still dying, and the fungal weapon was spreading. If they didn't stop it soon, there might not be any Guardians left. The solution came from an unexpected source, Kieran, the young man who'd been one of the first Guardians Sarah had trained. He'd gone on to become a Guardian of mountain forests, and his background in biochemistry, the career he'd left behind when the forest claimed him, suddenly became crucial. "I think I can modify it," he said via video call, his face gaunt from weeks of sleepless work. "The fungus is programmable. If we can get a sample, I can reprogram it to neutralize the toxin instead of producing it. Turn their weapon into our cure." "That's brilliant," Delilah said. "But getting a sample—" "I know where they're producing it," Marcus interrupted. "I've tracked the Alliance's money flows. They have a laboratory in Brazil, disguised as a pharmaceutical research facility." Everyone looked at Sarah. She was the most experienced Guardian, the one with the deepest connection to the network. The best chance of infiltrating the facility and returning with what they needed. "It could be a trap," Delilah warned. "Probably is," Sarah agreed. "But we don't have a choice." The mission required Sarah to become something she'd never been before. A spy, an infiltrator, someone who moved through the human world with deliberate stealth. She couldn't rely on her forest powers here. They'd detect that immediately. She had to be purely human, using human skills, human cunning. Marcus went with her, posing as a journalist investigating pharmaceutical companies. It was his contacts, his credentials, that got them through the first security checkpoints. But it was Sarah's ability to sense the fungus, to feel its presence, through the faint connection it still maintained to natural mycelial networks. That led them to the right laboratory. The facility was more secure than they'd anticipated. Armed guards, electronic locks, surveillance everywhere. They'd need a distraction. That's when the forest itself intervened. Sarah hadn't called for help. Didn't think she could this far from her own woods, surrounded by so much concrete and steel. But the Amazon was ancient and powerful, and it recognized one of its defenders in danger. The trees at the facility's perimeter began to grow, not slowly over years, but rapidly, urgently. Roots cracked through pavement. Vines wrapped around guard towers. In a matter of minutes, the carefully maintained grounds became a jungle reclaiming its territory. In the chaos, Sarah and Marcus slipped into the laboratory. The fungus samples were where Delilah's intelligence said they'd be, stored in a climate-controlled vault. Sarah felt sick touching them, feeling the concentrated malice that had been engineered into these organisms. "Got it?" she said, securing 3 samples in the specialized container Kieran had provided. "Let's go," but they'd been noticed. Alarms blared. Guards converged, and Sarah realized they weren't going to make it out. "Run," she told Marcus. "Get the samples to Kieran. I'm not leaving you. You have to." She pressed the container into his hands. "This is bigger than me. He'd reject toxic intrusions. She traveled to forests she'd never seen, met Guardians she'd only known through dreams, stood beneath trees that had existed for thousands of years, and added her brief spark of life to their long memories. She wanted to see as much as she could, protect as much as possible, before her time ran out. One day, feeling weaker than usual, she asked Marcus to take her to the clearing where it had all begun, the place where she'd offered herself to the forest and become something more than human. The clearing was just as she remembered, peaceful, dappled with sunlight, the old oak standing eternal watch. But now she saw it with different eyes, understanding the full weight of what had happened here. "I was so scared that day," she told Marcus. "I thought I was losing myself." "Did you lose yourself?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think I found parts of myself I didn't know existed. And yes, I gave up parts too. But that's what transformation means. You don't stay the same. You become. Do you wish you'd chosen differently?" "Never." She pressed her palm to the oak's trunk, feeling the vast network spreading beneath the soil, connecting her to every guardian, every forest, every living thing that had learned to speak through the mycelial web. "This is what I was meant to do, who I was meant to be." The seasons turned. Autumn came, and Sarah felt the familiar ache in her bones, the call to rest. But this year the call was different. deeper. Final, she knew. She gathered everyone at the cottage. Marcus, Delilah, Kieran, Marley, the young guardians she'd trained, even Mrs. Patterson from town, who had become an unexpected ally and friend. Dr. Chen came too, carrying the guilt of what she'd done and the determination to make amends. I wanted to say goodbye, Sarah told them. And thank you for helping me be a bridge, for walking between worlds with me. This isn't goodbye, Kieran protested. You'll recover. We have treatments. No, Sarah smiled gently. This is what it means to be a guardian. We give everything to the forest, including ourselves. My time is complete. There were tears, arguments, denial. But Sarah remained calm, certain. She had made her peace with this ending. That night, as the first frost settled on the ground, Sarah walked into her forest one last time. Marcus walked with her, refusing to let her go alone. I'll miss you, he said as they reached the old oak. So much. I'll be here, Sarah replied. Not as I am now, but here, in the roots, in the leaves, in the soil. Listen closely and you'll hear me. She pressed her back against the oak's trunk and slowly slid down to sit among its roots. The tree's branches bent around her, cradling her, welcoming her home. Marcus sat beside her, holding her hand as the night deepened and stars appeared overhead. Tell them, Sarah whispered as her breathing slowed. Tell all the guardians, tell everyone who will listen. The forests need protectors. The earth needs bridges. There will always be people who choose destruction, but there must always be people who choose differently, who stand between, who remember that we're part of the natural world, not separate from it. Her eyes closed, her breathing stilled, and in that moment, Marcus felt something extraordinary. Sarah didn't disappear. She transformed. Her body began to merge with the tree, bark slowly growing over her skin, roots weaving through her hair. She was becoming part of the forest she'd protected, joining the eternal cycle. The oak tree hummed with her presence, and through the root network, every guardian in the world felt it. Sarah had completed her journey. She had become what all guardians eventually became, a permanent part of the living world, forever. Marcus stayed with her through the night, watching as the transformation completed. By dawn there was no trace of Sarah's human form, but there was a new strength in the oak, a new vitality, and when the wind blew through its branches, Marcus could swear he heard her voice, whispering comfort and encouragement. 10 years later, the world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The Threshold Institute had grown into an international organization with chapters on every continent. Hundreds of guardians had been identified, trained, and supported. Forests were recovering. Species were returning. The balance was slowly being restored. Marcus, now graying at the temples, still directed the Institute's work. He'd never remarried, never looked for another love. His partnership with Sarah, brief as it had been, had defined his life. He often visited the oak tree, speaking to it as if Sarah could hear. Sometimes he brought others, new guardians seeking wisdom, children who wanted to hear stories about the first bridgewalker, people who needed to understand why protecting nature mattered. And sometimes, when the light was right and the wind blew just so, he thought he saw her, a shimmer in the air, a face in the bark, a presence that felt like coming home. Kieran had become a legend among guardians. His scientific approach combined with deep spiritual connection, creating new ways of understanding and protecting the natural world. Delilah retired from active fieldwork, but continued her research, publishing papers that changed how humanity understood forest ecology. Marley's community organizing model had been adopted worldwide, showing that conservation and human thriving weren't opposites but necessary partners. Dr. Chen led the scientific wing of the Institute, dedicating her life to supporting guardians rather than hunting them, and the guardians themselves. They continued Sarah's work. Some were public figures leading conservation movements and inspiring millions. Others worked quietly, known only to their forests and the communities they served. All of them understood they were part of a larger story, a longer timeline, a deeper purpose. One autumn evening, a young woman named Anna stood at the edge of a forest, feeling drawn by something she couldn't name. She was lost searching, uncertain about her place in the world. The trees whispered to her. The wind carried an invitation, and deep in the root network, Sarah's presence stirred, recognizing another soul ready to walk between worlds. Anna took a step forward, then another, following the call deeper into the woods. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she felt certain she would find it here among the trees, where the boundary between human and nature grew thin enough to cross. Behind her, the everyday world continued, cars honking, phones buzzing, the endless rush of human civilization. Ahead of her lay something older, deeper, more essential. She was about to become a guardian. And somewhere in the roots of an ancient oak, Sarah smiled. The cycle continued. The balance held. And between the human world and the wild one, bridges remained. People who chose to stand in that liminal space, protecting both sides, honoring the connection that had always existed, even when humanity forgot it was there. The forest needed guardians. The earth needed bridges, and there would always be those who answered the call, who heard the whisper in the leaves and understood that they were being offered not just power, but purpose. They were the threshold keepers, the ones who walked between, the voices for those who couldn't speak, and the forests in their ancient wisdom continued to choose well. The end. We are not separate from nature. We are nature, and it is us. The guardians simply remember this truth more clearly than most, and in remembering, they help the rest of us remember too. Thank you all for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of our dark tales. Your support keeps the shadows alive and the stories growing. See you in the next one only on Nightfeed.